Genshin players and anime enjoyers alike were concerned when recent news and information that showcases anime development and future releases seem to have allegedly reported that the Genshin Impact anime is not only not releasing anytime soon, but it seems to have not been in production at all. Well, to be honest, I'm not that surprised. When sizable studios like HoyoVerse and Ufotable announces a long-term collaboration, then I can safely assume that it's not something that will only last for the next 4 to 5 years, considering the amount of work that needs to be done on both sides of the collaboration project itself and the number of projects they have running as individual studios. However, I do have one glaring concern that I think is the main reason as to why the development of this anime has been taking a long time, and is also the one reason that I think can absolutely destroy the anime in its entirety if they don't find a way to circumvent it through all this development. That one thing is the story. More specifically, the structure of the story. And that's why in this video, I'm going to discuss what makes Genshin's narrative structure become an element that might be tricky to navigate, and also discuss what it is that they have to change from the game structure in order to better fit the anime model. While also discussing why is it that this might take a lot longer than people might think. Without further ado, the name's Leafy, and welcome back to Let's Talk Slow About Games, Genshin Edition. Now, I want to make it clear that while there are a lot of other smaller kinks that the writers might want to iron out in Genshin's story, the structure is the one that I think can pose the biggest of problems when it comes to adapting the materials that they have in the game into an anime form. Because when it comes to the other aspects of the show, it is safe to say that Hoyo will more than likely have it sufficiently covered. They already have an insane and extremely experienced anime studio in Ufotable collaborating with their own anime studio, which have shown to have the ability to produce insane animations. Genshin also already has insane world building to support the settings, and the lore is about as deep as Morgan Freeman's voice after inhaling a tank full of sulfur hexafluoride.
Act very strangely.
And you have plenty of characters all with differing backgrounds and involvements in the story, not to mention that they have ample amount of lore that involves one another, which will definitely bring more depth to their individual lore both as the main characters' companions and their overall history in their own respective regions. However, it is exactly that huge rotating cast of characters that might prove to be such a troublesome aspect to navigate for the anime writers. Because while the way Genshin's story structure would work just fine in a video game setting, it's a whole other story when you have to implement the same structure into a fully fledged anime show. Problem number one is maintaining the audience's, our sense of connection to these characters. In Genshin, we meet a lot of characters in our journey across Teyvat, and I mean, a lot of characters. And that's only counting playable characters. We haven't even considered NPCs, and they look like to be a big part in the whole anime's landscape. The big problem is that with such a huge cast of characters, it'll be hard to say that each of them will get enough screen time to a point where the audience can even be bothered to remember them or relate to them. And that can be troublesome because one of the hallmarks of a great show is having memorable and relatable characters. And with the foundation that Genshin has, it'll be really hard to necessarily achieve that. So it's probably not a stretch to say that they are really going to have to get some characters become more involved than how they were in the game, or they're really going to have to segment their attention towards characters that really matter to the progression of the story, which might include eliminating some of the more smaller role ones. Let's look at it this way, and say that in an ideal world, we're gonna get one season per region, with 12 to 13 episodes per season being the current industry sweet spot. And then we go to looking at this from, say, in terms of the Mondstadt arc. Obviously, the Knights, Venti, and Diluc are probably going to have most of the limelight, but what about the seemingly unrelated characters such as Bennett, Fischl, and Diona? How are they going to be built into the story? Even Mona might be tricky to really write into the main story because she's one of those characters who is kind of more generally connected to sort of everything, but not quite involved in such a direct manner to any of it, at least in the overall story of Genshin so far. And realistically, 12 to 13 episodes is nowhere near enough for the writers to have space for filler episodes to showcase these people, and pushing it to 24 episodes might be doable, but it risks having too much filler if not done right. All of the nations will have this sort of division of characters that play a lot into the actual main storyline, and those who are just of no use. The reason why this sort of scenario isn't a problem when it comes to Genshin in a video game form is because we, the players, actively play them on a regular basis and or encounter some of these characters through quests and events, and we can build our connections to them through such means. This is not a luxury that the watchers can possibly have in a TV show form, nor will the writers have the luxury of the time and space to cram such events into the already rather strict timeline that they probably have to adhere to. So they are definitely going to have to modify many segments of the overall Archon Quest arcs in order to better utilize these other characters in a way that wouldn't have to compromise the overall time allocation they would have for the season. Which is why I'd say that it wouldn't be such a surprise if this is exactly why this anime is taking a long time to create. They have all this content to work through and shift through, and that's not even all of it listed on this wiki list. I won't even be surprised if they are actually waiting for the game itself to reach the conclusion of its main story, just so that they can actually begin production. That way they can avoid the potential plot holes or loose ends that might occur if they were to create the anime now while the story is still ongoing in the game itself. The second problem, which is by way an extension of the first problem, is to change the way each region's story is structured, which makes it so that each region actually seems like they affect one another and they are part of Teyvat as a whole. What I mean is, a lot of the way Genshin's story is done makes it look like as if they specifically section off each region from one another, and what happens in one region barely has any outright connection with what's happening elsewhere, unless it has anything to do with ley lines and archons in general. The academia placed the citizens of Sumeru City, Sumeru's capital, through an endless dream that spanned weeks, and the outside world didn't even notice that the city was basically on pause for that long. Fontaine literally drowned, and no one seemed to have batted an eye. This sort of segregation of regional events also meant that characters that have accompanied us in other regions barely have any chance to come and help the traveler in situations where we may have really needed their help. Jean, as the current de facto leader of Mondstadt, or Diluc as a respected businessman, could have helped us clear our name when we were a designated fugitive in Liyue. And Yanfei could have done the same when we were helping Linny on the Fontaine trial. Lots of these situations where Hoyo had chances to bring back recurring characters just always thrown by the wayside, and recurring characters are what helps shows maintain a fresh perspective that comes back into some episodes to make sure that the audience isn't just stuck with the same repeating cast of people and perspectives, while also not consistently having to be on their toes for whenever new characters show up. This is also why I can't help but to always find it a bit of a shame whenever a new region is released in Genshin, because that meant that we won't really be seeing any of the region's previous characters all that often, or even ever from then on when it comes to some extreme cases. A lot of the Mondstadt characters haven't made any meaningful recent appearances, and I'm honestly really missing their presence in the game. It also doesn't help that the one designated permanent deuteragonist that Genshin has to offer as a companion to the traveler is none other than Paimon, who, in full offense, is not someone who both have the personality and the voice that we would want to hear in many seasons of an anime. Oh, and I swear to God, if they make the traveler mainly mute in the shows as well, then I will personally fight Hoyoverse because that's just bullshit. But I guess that can also be the one aspect of the show that players can really look forward to, because we'll actually have either Aether or Lumine talk instead of hearing Paimon 24/7. And that just brings us to the last problem, which is how they are going to incorporate character story quests into the main Archon storyline itself. Character quests is one of the most straightforward way for us to get to know the characters better. Yet in Genshin's case, there's barely any of them that really outright contributes to the way the main story itself progresses, and we barely see them really directly intertwine with the region's respective Archon quest, bar from the second chapters of both Zhongli, Raiden Shogun, and Nahida's story quest. And not all of them are easy to write into the main lore, such as Diluc's, Deya's, and Furina's, because those three actually had their story quest directly play off the happenings of the Archon quest. Not to mention the sheer volume of the amount of character story quests that they'll have to really take into account. At the end of the day, I just don't want the anime to be something that couldn't stand on its lonesome. I don't want it to be an anime where people are gonna complain with things like, "Oh, it's much clearer in the game, the anime skipped out on a lot of things." I'm just hoping that they'll be able to do the story, the characters, and the incredibly deep lore enough justice so that it actually provides the audience, which would be a mix of both game players and pure anime watchers ideally, with the same level of enjoyment across the board. Instead of you having to really know the game beforehand to even have a semblance of a chance of understanding the anime itself. And that's about all I have for this video. I do hope that we get to see this anime come into fruition in the next year or two, is what I would want to say, although it'll probably be a bit more realistic to think of it in the realm of the next 3 or 4 years, but personally, I wouldn't mind at all if they take their time with it just so that they can properly adapt everything into place. And I very much rather spend the time waiting for a much more polished and finished show rather than see them rush it to its death. Thank you for those who tuned in, and hope you guys enjoyed this video or at least took something away from it. Feel free to leave a like if you enjoyed it, and also feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Until the next video, the name's Leafy, and I'll see you all next time. Sayonara.